This video is going to cover the installation of the Fulcrum indexer. Fulcrum is an indexer that indexes the Bitcoin Cash blockchain. It crawls all the blocks and it tracks the address balances and the UTXOs associated with each address. And it runs what's known as the Electrumx protocol, which is used by the Electron Cash wallet. So just to recap, these videos are being posted at the psfoundation.cash/video. And if you scroll down to the bottom section called DevOps and Infrastructure, this video is building off of these previous videos where in part one of setting up a full node, I showed how to how to download pre-synced databases off of IPFS. So you should definitely watch that video as a prerequisite to following this video. This is that cash strap page at fullstack.cash/cash strap. Here are the connection information for connecting to the file servers over IPFS. And then what you'll want to do is download the Fulcrum pre-synced database, which is about 31 gigabytes. And here is the IPFS hash for that file. And there's also a link to the Docker container that we're going to use. So you can click on that link. That will take you here to GitHub under the Permissionless Software Foundation GitHub group. And if you go to the search bar and type in Docker dash, it'll bring up the Docker containers. We're going to be working with this Docker Fulcrum container. And these instructions apply equally to Bitcoin Cash and eCash. Fulcrum will run on both of them. So I'll walk through the README here, but again, just where you should be at if you've been following the videos is I'm logged into the server that I'm setting up right now. If I run docker ps, I can see I have one process, which is the full node. And if I do docker logs --tail 20 for the last 20 lines, and then -f follow, this is the output of the full node. I can see the progress is at 1.0, so it's fully synced, currently at a block height of 723.253. So I have a fully synced blockchain, and that's where you should be at too. That's what I've covered up to this point in the videos. Also, so I'm in this infra directory that I created, and I have the BCH full node that I created in the last video is in that directory, and in this Fulcrum directory I have the zip file that I downloaded from IPFS, and I unzipped that into a directory, or I unzipped that which created this directory called blockchain, and this is the pre-synced Fulcrum database. As I did in the full node, I'll show how to sync from Genesis, and then I'll show how to mount this pre-synced database that I downloaded using over IPFS. So I'm actually going to rename that blockchain to let's see, pre-synced blockchain, just so it's not in the way. So let's go ahead and jump into the README here. First thing we want to do is clone this repository. So I'll git and clone the repo. And then, as before, there's a mainnet and a testnet. We're going to focus on mainnet. There is this mainnet.conf file. Let's take a look at that. And I don't think I want to change anything in here. Yeah, here's the data directory. That's going to be specific to the Docker container. This is already set up to talk to the full node, which is running in a Docker container. It's got the default username and password for RPC. This is going to expose port 5001 and 5002. And the cert, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Yeah, you can change this. That doesn't matter. Yeah, I don't think any of this needs to be adjusted. Okay, we've already downloaded the pre-sync database from the cache strap page, and we should take a look at the Docker Compose file. This also I don't think needs to change. It's going to set up these 2 Docker containers. It's going to mount the blockchain directory, and that's the only volume that we need to worry about. And okay, so what we need to do is generate a self-signed certificate. So there's essentially a recipe here that you can follow to do that. And where does that cert directory live? Move them into a directory called certs in the same directory as Docker Compose. So I'm going to create a directory called certs. That's where those certs are going to live. And then I'm going to follow these instructions. I already recently ran update. I don't need to do that. Let's make sure OpenSSL is installed. That's already installed. So these instructions I'm going to go through really quickly. You don't really need to understand. Oh, and so it's going to ask for a password. I always just use test because I'm going to end up, we're going to end up with some certs and we're going to remove this password, but the intermediate steps require a password. So I just use test for everything because, like I said, it's not going to matter what password you use. And then I just hit enter for all of these to use the defaults. There we go. And then finally we can remove that certificate. So what we end up with are these 2 files, server.cert and server.key. And those are good for like a year. It's like a self-signed certificate. This is kind of just hoop jumping for to make the Fulcrum server happy. Okay, so we created those 2 files, we created a certs directory, and we moved them into the certs directory. So now Fulcrum has a self-signed certificate, it'll be happy. And now, as before, we can build the Docker container. So if I go Docker Compose build, this is going to build it, and I'll give it a minute to do that. Okay, the Docker container finished building, and I'm going to bring it up with Docker Compose upd. Now it's creating 2 Docker containers, and I'll explain that in a minute. Right now, let's see what's going on with this Fulcrum mainnet container. Docker Compose down. Okay, something's wrong. It didn't mount the directory properly. Blockchain. Create a blockchain directory. Normally I just mount the pre-sync database. I don't try to sync from Genesis, so. Alright, let's try that again. And actually let's check the Docker Compose file. Yeah, 2 directories and a directory called blockchain. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that. So it's now syncing from Genesis. It found the Docker container, or that has the Bitcoin Cash full node. It identified the current block height, and it's in the process of now indexing from Genesis. And so I'm going to go ahead and bring that down. Or actually, before I do that, Docker PS. There's 2 folders here. Fulcrum mainnet is the Fulcrum process, the indexer, and it's exposed ports 5001 and 5002, and that's what you would connect to if you wanted to connect to this with your Electrumx wallet or your Electron Cash wallet. There's also this Fulcrum REST API. As I said before, Fulcrum runs the Electrumx protocol, which is different than a REST API protocol. So what this second container does is it sets up a JavaScript REST API on port 3001, and it essentially proxies it so that you can just treat this like another conventional REST API. It's much easier to interact with that way. That way you don't have to worry about the self-signed certificate. That's all sort of hidden in the container. You don't need to deal with it. You can just talk to it like you would any other REST API in a normal web developer workflow. So that's the purpose of this second container. So okay, so now I'm going to bring these down. So that's how you would sync from Genesis if you didn't already have a pre-synced database. And you have to have a fully synced full node before you can start the indexer. So now I'm going to go ahead and remove that blockchain directory, and I'm going to move the pre-synced blockchain directory and rename it so that it mounts this directory instead. So now this snapshot is from yesterday, so it should sync very fast now. So okay, Docker PS, I've only got the full node running. Okay, bringing it up, and let's check the output. So there, it's loading the database, and because it's 32 gigabytes, it takes a minute. That's actually a good sign. So it detected the current block height. It definitely detected something in terms of an existing height. These are just messages that it started the container. Should start indexing here in a second. But so far this looks good. Oh, okay. I see. It actually, because it was already synced from yesterday, it already downloaded and processed those blocks. It processed 92 blocks, which is how many have passed since I took the snapshot. So it's actually fully synced now, and it's running. So that's why it was a little confusing, because it really didn't need to sync very much. Yours might need to sync a little bit more, depending on how much time has passed since the snapshot was taken. But okay, so now both the full node and the Fulcrum indexer are running. From here, the last step is to set up the SLP token indexer, and then you'll have the full cache stack, and then we can add the BCH API, REST API, and the optional IPFS service provider.